Hello, everyone. Maya is with you, and I'm very curious to dive into the conversation with the new guest that I just met, Philip Raeth, coming from Palleos. Why I'm so excited about this conversation, why I decided to bring Philip to my podcast and like have a conversation with you and share that with all of you, with him and share that with all of you, is because I shared that like many times like before that I have pretty much experience in patient recruitment. Back in the days, I've been working in patient recruitment, and many of you know patient recruitment is like one of the biggest challenges that we have in this industry. We always want to optimize how fast we get to patients, basically like how we bring awareness, how we bring them to participate in the clinical trials, and how we make sure that they stay in the clinical trials. And that's been always a challenge. And we're always brainstorming what are these different ways of we changing that, how we can we overcome this like challenge. And what I learned throughout so many years of tackling this problem is that there is no single answer to that. So when I heard about Philip and his company Palleos, I got excited that like there is a company specializing a lot into clinical trials, but specifically innovative clinical trial designs, and decided to bring Philip to brainstorm together with me actually how these innovative clinical trial designs can actually help us overcome some of the hurdles that we face today with more traditional clinical trials. So before we dive into the topic, Philip, welcome to Trials with Myc, and please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Well, thank you, Maya. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me. And thank you for this kind introduction. So, a couple of words about myself. So, by training, I am a I studied business administration, right? So I come from the business side of things, and I got into the business, let's say, from a learning by doing perspective, right? So I have some IT background as well, and I started my career in clinical research essentially around 2011, 2012, which was when, actually my stepmother, she has been in clinical trials, and my father as well, for a long time. Um, and it came about because I was looking for something to do in the future, something entrepreneurial, that she said, well, I'm doing a business again. And so we talked, and it turned out that I said, okay, I'm interested to learn from you, to be mentored, and to essentially dive into that business. I didn't know much at the time, I must say, right? So you hear some conversations, but I wasn't into it. So I dove in it from that business side, right? Which means finance, which is something I learned. You know the numbers. That doesn't change a lot from business to business, so it's something you can do. And also business development, because I think business school trains you well in how to present things, right? So these are the two things that I got to do in the first place. And so I basically learned from an academic perspective. That's important here to see and to discuss for a topic later. How scientists approach clinical trials, how they design the study, scientifically approach it, how they build a hypothesis, and how that is then conveyed to pharma when raising funding for clinical trials. We were the CRO doing the trial, but there was a lot of in touch with the scientists that are coming up with a hypothesis, with the ideas. And that entails coming up with a study design, right? So that's kind of the perspective I'm going to take. Maybe to finish off my little biography, I started in these areas, moved into more IT-driven areas as well, so data management, safety, which have a more, let's say, technical background because there are systems being used mostly for doing it, and had basically these areas under my oversight over the years until I came the managing director, and still are focusing on these, right? I'm not an operational person. I have never been. I've never really did a lot of like monitoring work, maybe participated in one to see how it is. But so that's my perspective on that world, right? More technical, more analytical. Yeah, I think that's it. In terms of my biography, overall, I'm German. I'm here in Wiesbaden, which is next to Frankfurt.
That is
Elias,
very beautiful area
it is very
with some
beautiful.
of the best wines.
Correct. I was going to say that we are close to the one of the best, I'd say the best Riesling area in the world. So in the summer, that's pretty nice. Everybody is coming here, happy to join.
Exactly. Great, Philip. Thanks for this. Thanks for sharing this, and it's great to see more entrepreneurs coming to clinical research. I myself, I'm like more or less similar story, but let's say driven by a different type of a reason to join the clinical research space. Philip, I wonder, since you work with many different companies and support them when thinking about their strategies, are do you think that the market, like pharma companies, biotech companies, are open to try new and different innovative clinical trial designs?
I have to say, not so much. That
Okay.
has been my conclusion. So I can tell you an interesting story, and that's how we can probably
Yeah.
start the conversation. We were looking, I think it was 2014, 15, I don't know, for a new statistician to head our department. And, important positions. So we had that person have a presentation on actually a free topic to choose. And basically, what he's currently still one of our statisticians. He basically had a presentation saying, "Look, I looked what clinical trials are doing, and I saw that basically all the statistics that most of them are doing are old-fashioned. They don't work, and I think there's a better way. And if you take me, I want to make it my mission somewhat
Mm.
to change that in that world, right?" And what he was talking about, I had no idea about that at the time, was the differentiation between one time you have the classical frequentist world, which is most of the, I think it changed a bit, but most of the clinical trials for were done that way. And then you have the Bayesian world. I won't go into like the details, but essentially the difference, how I understand it, is the Bayesian world says, well, let's look at what we know already, and let's at every point in time we make a statistical calculation, take that into account when we make our assumptions, when we want to interpret and calculate a result. And in the frequentist world, you take a normal distribution or some distribution that you think is true for the specific population you're looking at, and you apply that and you don't change that. And that's basically what he was looking at. I learned later that essentially, these approaches exist, and there are people in the clinical trial world, Don Barry, to name one, who's doing the iSpy. Some people know about that in the US, is a strong, advocate of the Bayesian world, and he has built his own company around it. But I don't see many people using it, right? So without being too technical, I think what we did at the time and what I found fascinating and basically pretty logical is we are collecting data on patients all the time. So it must be essentially and theoretically possible with every additional patient, we have more
Mm.
information. We know whether we move further towards the hypothesis we made with the like assumptions we had, or we move further away, right? Why do we recruit the full trial for 400 or whatever patients and then look, is it true? While we may be able to say something relevant already at 30, 40, 100, I don't know, another number of patients, right? And so that was, I think, the entry point for me to say, okay, there's a different way of doing this, right? Because also in the scientific discussions I participated with the academics group I was involved, there was never a discussion. There was like a clear way, a clear methodology to do it. And you would choose the one that is well known and nobody would ask any questions.
Mm.
Okay, so that was like the first touch point with clinical trial designs and how they can be different.
Yeah,
And
that's interesting.
so, yeah, and so what we did, given that we were in that segment of academic trials where you have some freedom, I'll move into the commercial part because it's a different discussion that has to do with the business risk. That we were in that situation where it's more scientific driven. And you're more free to basically, as an academic sponsor, to say, well, we want to do it a different way, right? We want to try an interesting design. And there's one trial that we engaged in that we actually get started in 2020. It took a long time to get to that point, which is the Neomono trial, which is a breast cancer trial, immuno-oncology. basically comparing two arms. Well, let's keep it that way, right? But there, it was the first time that before, I think when we started the discussions 2018-19, said, let's go for such a design. Let's try to implement an innovative Bayesian design that we can basically add 100, 150, 200 patients. I don't remember the exact cutoff points, right? Look at what's happening. And if it is going as planned, or we do have a signal that tells us you can actually stop because you already have a positive result, or you have to stop because no matter how many patients you recruit until the final number, it will not be ending in a positive result, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that was the approach, and so I think that was the first idea and first approach to get into that specific world. What you learn later on is that being so flexible comes at a cost, right?
Okay, tell me more about the cost. And because I'm the whole time I'm like listening to you very carefully, I'm like, if that sounds so promising, there must be a downside. So I'm
It
like,
is.
yeah, what's the downside of this model?
It's the flexibility actually. So in that trial, so imagine for making a point, a statistical point, you have to do an evaluation, right? So just looking at a clinical trial, you have to make sure for whatever patients you analyze that these patients have been, the data is clean, it's
Hmm.
final, and it's in a format you can evaluate it in, right? And so imagine that you're constantly recruiting patients, and if you would, at every patient, make this calculation, you can imagine that you have to go to site for every patient, mostly if you have like source data verification, check for every patient whether that's accurate, then report, finalize the data set, and evaluate. It's a crazy effort if you have many patients, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
you have to find a solution in between that says, okay, what is a reasonable amount of or number of patients that we can select where it makes sense to actually, we don't increase the costs by a lot because we say, okay, at that point we should have completed enough patients to have this number of patients readily available for the evaluation, and then be ready to analyze. That's one thing. The other thing is, imagine that while you're doing the analysis, you have to make a choice because your recruitment continues.
Mm.
So it will take you, for example, in the study I'm talking about, the study duration is 6 months. So from the point, the last patient, let's say after 100 patients, you say, okay, we do the analysis. You have to wait 6 months till that patient is through the study. All the data are there, it's cleaned. In this 6 months, recruitment will continue, and you
Mm-hmm.
might recruit, depends on the study, another 100 patients that are then not being used, right?
Oh.
So also that is a trade-off um, that you have to take into account, right? And beyond that, also what need to account for is, assume you stop the trial, right? You say, okay, we don't want to recruit after it, but then you lose time, and sites might lose a bit interest. Time moves on, new therapies come on, you have other competing studies. So here again, it's not free lunch. There is a
Mm.
cost, right? That you have to consider. That in the commercial world, not everybody will make.
Mm.
Because sometimes it's easier to say, okay, let's go the traditional path. Nobody will ask that many questions. The expected results are pretty clear, right? Because they have been done quite some time. And also in discussion with the regulatory authorities, you don't have that many questions. We spent, I think, a year before discussing in
Mm.
a
I
couple
was
of
going to ask
meetings
you. I
with the
was going to ask
scientific
you.
advice whether they accepted, and they had questions. Some didn't know the methodology that well, so we had to explain it, right? That again, for biotech, that can be too late in terms of their
Absolutely.
runway and their budget and so on. So for us, it was okay, it was doable, right? But I think it was difficult. It was more difficult in this situation. Is difficult in a situation where you have an actual commercially relevant product to be brought to registration.
Mm.
And yeah, I think that is our experience in the discussions we had before, that some say it's all nice, we understand it, but the risk is too much for us, right?
Mm.
So that's what I've seen quite a bit.
Can you again like summarize what are the biggest risks of this Bayesian like method?
So I think first there's a scientific risk or a regulatory
Mm.
risk, let's put it that way, right? All innovative designs are by nature innovative.
Innovative.
So
Yeah.
there's a couple of things you need to consider. First, given that you have to get approval from an authority, you have to find somebody at the authority that understands, supports, and actually approves basically your design.
In a way,
What?
champion for this new methodology.
Yes, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that will take time, that will take energy, and that will cost money.
Mm.
Um, Also, these designs being innovative also means that the interpretation of the results is a bit different. It's not the classical, oh, that's a p-value, it's relevant. It's different. So, also the interpretation can be different in the sense that it will be harder to communicate than the classical frequentist way to doctors, harder to communicate also to authorities or to any other stakeholder that you will have in place. So that also takes a lot of explaining.
Hmm.
And so these are, I think, the scientific risks, the first part. Then I think then you have actual budgetary or resource risks. It takes more time, right? So you have to have the lifeline, the money to make that happen, to get these advantages. And you also have to have the experts yourself or buy them.
Hmm.
They are not that many. It's not a standard to get it done, right? So I think that's the second part to it. The third is more indication driven. Let's put it that way. So the longer a therapy takes, the longer you have to wait till the results are there. If you have,
Hmm.
for example, a 2 week therapy, just flu, then the time from patient in the study to out of the study is much shorter. So
Yeah.
the
More
cycle
efficient.
times are much shorter, and you can benefit from this much more because you will not recruit another 100 costly patients. It will be very quick. So I think these are the major points I would name. One has to do with how people are treated and how the disease runs. The other is resource budget. The first one is scientific, which I think is the most prominent one because it
And if
kind of manages the first, and the second and third.
and if you were to summarize the top benefit, like top three benefits of this Bayesian, I understand by the way, and it's awesome that you're sharing like these insights because I understand that it's not black and white world.
Yeah,
It's like you and I see the need for experts like you in your company who actually know these two worlds and can advise you what can you leverage the best, because I understand it's scientific driven, regulatory driven, like capacity driven, and also indication driven decision whether you go with some sort of an innovative trial design or maybe
yeah,
you stick to the traditional ones. So it's great that there are companies like yours that can actually advise academia but also commercial companies on what's the best way to move forward. But can you again outline which are the best benefits of a different type of a design than compared to traditional one, and especially you said the Bayesian one, so in the Bayesian one which are these top three really big advantages?
oh, top three. So let's return to
Maybe
the
start from
study I
the really
mentioned.
the biggest like
But I
one.
can I can illustrate at the example that we did.
Hmm.
The result of the study wasn't what we had hoped for, but I think we kind of did the best out of it because we had such a design. So the Neomono trial, which I mentioned, it ran till the first 100 patients were through, right, as planned. And after another six months, we I think it was 100, it might be 120, I don't know, but like the lowest number, pretty much lower end of the recruitment, where the first interim analysis was going to happen. The overall recruitment was aimed at 450 patients, right? So we were at
Mm.
roughly 25% of the recruitment. Very early in the trial recruited very quickly, which is a problem, as I mentioned before, because you don't want to fully recruit it because you're ready to do the analysis.
Mm.
So we had to wait another 6 months till we got these 100 patients through the whole therapy, got the data in, and so on. When the analysis was final and done, we were at 370 out of 450 randomized patients. So you see, we got a big chunk out of these patients, which, depending on the result,
Yeah.
wouldn't have been useful, right? In terms of the statistical
Mm.
analysis,
Yeah.
treatment might have been successful, great, but
Yeah.
so that's what happened. The result, unfortunately, was that it's not working and meeting the primary endpoint. So we had to
Mm.
stop recruitment. So you can see that I think the downside is we recruited like roughly 250 patients in that time frame till the data were there to be analyzed and the decision was made that couldn't be used for the primary endpoint. You can do explorative things and so on, but this cost happened. But we didn't recruit another 80 patients,
Yeah.
right, to basically, have the full trial. So
Mm. And then make
I
it
think
full.
that's the first advantage. If it
Yeah.
works, and even in a negative sense, because you
Yeah. Yeah.
don't get the result, you save millions because you don't treat 80 patients. So that's 80 times not 6 months treatments. That's 80 times the patient fees, the fees to the investigators, and so on and so forth.
Mm.
As a
Yeah.
CRO, you lose turnover, of course, right? But I think that's not the right way thinking about it, right?
I
So the
agree.
right way thinking about it, you want to deliver value to the client, and here you delivered value. Yes, you're risk based. That means there's not a certain 400 patients that okay, after 400 patients, it's over. Um, so I think that's the first top one. If it works, you save money,
Yeah.
right?
But correct me if I'm wrong, Philip. I understand the part with the saving money, and I'm sure this is very appealing to lots of companies out there.
Yeah,
But am I also right saying that it's also more ethical? Because
it
at the
is.
end of the day, you said that you stopped like recruiting these 80 extra patients that you were supposed to recruit because you already knew it's not going to work. So actually you didn't apply and you didn't apply the promising like new treatment on the other 80 people, and they could go for another option that would work better for them, right?
Yes,
So isn't it also that it's more ethical at the end of the day, and shouldn't regulators see that as the more ethical approach?
I absolutely think it is, right? I mean, the earlier you can call the winner in a
Yeah.
comparison of two medications, the earlier you are actually, making a decision for or against some new drug that is not helping. Right? I fully agree. That is absolutely something that you can basically be more efficient in selecting the right point of the decision making instead of saying just after 400 or after 500 we'll make that decision. I fully
Yes.
agree. It's absolutely a more ethical thing. And that would have been one of my points, probably number three in that sense. It really depends, obviously, also on the therapy, because, for example, in the trial that I mentioned, both of the groups were receiving the new drug. It was just a
Mm.
combination that was a bit different, but still, the point remains the same. And I think the second one is, again, it's also about speed, right? So if you
Yeah.
get into a groove, looking at, for example, a larger implementation of such an approach, if you look at the iSpy trial, um, I encourage everybody to look into it. iSpy 123, which is a design that they do in breast cancer in the US, where they basically fully implemented this approach, right? By
Mm-hmm.
saying, let's always take the same sites, always take the same ethic committees and regulatory authorities, and let's just run the same baseline standard of care plus the new drug
Mm.
all the time. So they have an ongoing trial all the time. That takes away all the regulatory risk because they know the trial design, right? And
Yeah.
you're benefiting from this oiled machine. But
Mm.
so kudos to them to setting it out that way. I think that's the way to do it. To have a streamline and a discussion and a collaboration between all these partners.
Yeah.
Um, But it's difficult and very expensive to do, right? You need a lot of partners to do it, and that is not feasible for a small biotech that just wants to do it for their phase two or something, right?
Yeah, but
Um,
someone needs to start at the end of the day. And if I
yes,
understand correctly, first of all, we'll definitely add this link to like the podcast episode so that people can have a look. But I'm thinking that do I understand correctly that this organization are trying to overcome some of these hurdles that you mentioned beforehand? Because you've also faced
yes,
challenges, they know about these challenges and they're looking to optimize, actually to overcome these challenges so that they can kind of like position this new methodology more in front of the companies. Is that what they're trying to do?
yeah. Yes, I mean the dream is even bigger. It's a very interesting thing. I mean,
Well,
what you're doing with a clinical trial is to say, this is how I see the world, and within that world, statistically speaking, I'm treating that many patients, and then I have a result. We all know in between a lot of things happen. Other treatments are developed. Um, Maybe different behavioral patterns that are important for the disease develop. A lot of things happen, right?
mm,
So the idea of these Bayesian people is to say, every time I get a new information, I should be able to include it in a clinical trial, right?
mm,
So we get into the world of precision medicine somewhat, because the
mm,
idea is to say, look, we start somewhere. We don't even use the standard of care. We start with what we know. As soon as we have a new, better drug,
data. Hmm.
yeah, that is on the horizon, we stop everything else, we move to the new one and test this, right? So you're in a constant improvement cycle,
Mm,
um, which can be done statistically, but is very, very difficult to execute. I don't know
yeah,
how you would do that with all the regulatory, the operational, and the budgetary constraints you have on the world. But that's the idea behind, right?
yeah.
Here's
It's
a
like
patient.
break
Every
things
time you know
fast,
something new.
basically.
Yes, yes,
Just
yes.
break things fast, like what
Yeah,
the Silicon Valley companies like
correct.
speak all the time. Like grow fast, execute fast, break things fast, so that you can learn and iterate.
Yes,
It is tricky though because sometimes you don't know what's this point where things may go in the other direction, but it does make
yes,
sense. It does make sense to actually evolve while you learn and not wait until a certain milestone. Now I'm
correct.
supposed to learn. No, you
Yes,
need to learn
that's
all
the
the time
idea.
and you need to adapt. Like that's behind the whole idea of adaptive designs as well. Philip, one last question on my end. Where do you see the future of clinical trials? Do you think that in the next 2 years, this Bayesian or maybe another innovative model design, let's put it that way, will be more established? Or
I
maybe
think
in
so, and
certain countries?
there's a couple of reasons why. So if you look at the constraints that I mentioned, right? First, operational. Why is this constraint there? Because we still have to, at least here in Europe, less so in the US, I guess, but mostly we still have to go to the clinic to check for the data and see whether it corresponds to what's in the system in the database.
Mm,
Looking at what's happening there, I'm not even speaking about AI. I'm speaking of simply an electronic record that we
yeah.
are just implementing here in Germany right now. Um, that gives you like a little bit of an edge in terms of speed because, like technically speaking, if you have access to that clinic's data set, then it's original data. There might be mistakes in it, but there's no transfer problems, right? So you can kind of partially in the future, maybe even more so with AI agents checking for faults in their systems, you have direct access to the data. And so you eliminate that part first. The second problem is the integration of different systems. So you have to integrate from different sources to different types of formats that are different from the clinic to the clinical trial, right? These all people that are doing this. It is not a standard. It's being done for every trial again.
Yeah.
Also something that I think will change, right? And so what this enables us to is just to shorten the cycles of development bit by bit by bit by bit. So I think it will be more popular because the technology enables it to do these
Mm,
cycles. What I don't know how to expedite, and maybe things like like gene therapy or genetic modeling will change it. The speed of how biology works is still the same. right? You
Yeah,
will still need to treat,
the
I don't know, a
wounds.
cancer patient for 6 months. How do you shorten that? Maybe there's a way, I don't know. Maybe there's a way to model it in a cell or in a computer in the future that you can model a full human. I don't know. But so I think that will still be the limitation to some degree. But I think these approaches will be enabled because they live by the new data coming in, by the technological
Yeah.
advantages that we get bit by bit now through the things I mentioned. Yeah,
Super positive, Philip. Thank
I'm
you
an
so much
optimist.
for. Yeah, well, we have to be optimist, right? Otherwise, it's very hard to move forward. And I agree fully with you. Things are changing, so we also have to change. And something like things that are still new, of course, they're always like hard to adopt. But if we keep trying, and obviously there are people that are trying really hard, like people like you in your organization, also testing different approaches. That's how we're gonna learn and evolve. And you're right, technology also impacts what's possible, and pretty soon maybe there will be other approaches as well. Let's see. I'm only like worried when you say data because I'm on the data side of things and I know data has to be really perfect so that we can do all these other things, but I think we're also moving in that direction. So
Yes, I think
anyway,
we're
Philip,
improving.
thank you so much for sharing these the story that you mentioned, actually, these observations, and being so optimistic on the future of clinical trials. And maybe a year from now we'll have another conversation and see what has progressed.
Yeah, we may see. Thank you, Maya. Thank you for having me.
Thank
And
you.
looking forward to this being published. Thank you so much.
Thank you.